SEGA! Growing up, I always knew that I was different from everyone else. I couldn't quite put it into words, but I hated the fact that I could never connect with the other kids around me. Why was I different? Why was it so hard for me to make friends? I had so many questions, but no real way to express what I was feeling. All I knew is that I didn't like it. Then, when I was entering 4th grade, my mom finally gave me the answer I was looking for. She sat me down and told me that I had Asperger's syndrome.
Or just simply autism, as it's more commonly known nowadays.
For the next few years after that, I struggled to make it through public school. During my first year in middle school, I was constantly bullied, and the only form of solace I had was at my school's library. Eventually, the bullying got so bad that my mom took me out of the public school system altogether, and from 7th grade onwards, I'd be attending charter school. Fast forward to 2008. School had just gotten out for the summer, and I had just started making friends through YouTube and Skype. It was then that I managed to get into a voice acting group led by my friend Ryan, more commonly known to a lot of you as Aesthetic Gamer. It's here where this story truly begins. You see, up until this point, the only thing I really knew SEGA for was Sonic the Hedgehog. But it wasn't until Ryan showed me a short animated film titled Beyond the Window that I learned of the existence of Nights into Dreams. For those unaware, Nights into Dreams was the creation of Naoto Oshima and Yuji Naka, the dynamic duo responsible for the creation of Sonic just 5 years prior to Nights. Released in 1996, Nights was dubbed the Sega Saturn's premier title, and while the poor sales of the console may have obscured its success somewhat, its legacy would forever live on through the hearts of those who played it. This year, Nights turns 25, and as I struggled to think of a way to do this series justice, I was suddenly reminded of my youth. The feelings, the emotions, and the artistic passion that led me to declare Nights as my favorite SEGA franchise of all time. This is the story of how Nights helped me overcome the struggles of my disability and eventually helped me discover my true gender identity. While not directly related to Nights, Beyond the Window was a student film created by YouTube user Aolin. In the film, a young boy confined to his wheelchair longingly gazes at the stars only to remember that he can't leave his room. It isn't until he's visited by a jester made of twinkling golden stars that the boy gains the courage to leave the confines of his wheelchair and journey with them on a magical flight to the stars. The first time I saw this video, I was moved to tears, and even as an adult, it still manages to make me choke up. In many ways, I felt like the young boy, held back by something I had no control over, my only wish being for others to accept me for who I was. Inspired by the short, I found out not long after from an interview with the film's director Marissa Delbrecin that some of the key elements that inspired her short film were the Peter Pan story and the classic Sega Saturn game, Nights into Dreams. Nights was Marissa's most cherished childhood game, and the jester featured in the short film obviously took some inspiration from the game's title character, Nights. From that point onward, I was obsessed. But with no real way for me to play the original game, my longing to get into the franchise was nothing more than, well, a dream. Until that time came, I was stuck with plot summaries, screenshots, and random cameos in other SEGA games to help me better understand what Nights was about. While not all of the details are revealed to the player, this is what I found out. The original Nights follow the story of two ordinary children, Elliot Edwards and Claire Sinclair. Both kids suffer from nightmares related to issues they were facing in the real world. For Elliot, it's his loss during a basketball game with his friends, and for Clarice, it's her stage fright when auditioning for a concert. When the children fall asleep, they're transported to the world of Nightopia and are greeted by a friendly, jester-like character going by the name of Nights. From the beginning, Nights was right up my alley. I loved movies like Disney's Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland growing up, and if anyone's familiar with the animated film Little Nemo Adventures in Slumberland, Nights has a similar feeling, even down to the villain being a ruler over the realm of nightmares. In Nights, that role belongs to Wiseman the Wizard, and his villainous creations known as the Nightmarin. With Nights at their side, Elliot and Clarice use their inner courage to defeat Wiseman and overcome their nightmares. What made Nights' premise so interesting was just how little could be conveyed to the player due to the limitations of 3D cutscenes at the time. There exists far more supplemental material to give you an idea as to what's happening, but the magic of NiGHTS is best felt when you know as little as possible. Normally, I'd call that kind of approach lazy storytelling, but in the case of NiGHTS, I think it's more fun to use your imagination to fill in the blanks. However, trying to describe NiGHTS' gameplay is a lot more difficult to do because there really isn't anything else like it.
But for the uninitiated, this is how it worked. Each stage is structured like a classic Sonic game and has multiple acts you fly through, with the primary goal being to collect at least 20 blue chips so you can destroy these weird floating jellyfish-like things. If you manage to do that before time runs out, you'll be given extra time to increase your score. You fly through rings, perform acrobatics, anything to increase your overall score by the end of the stage. After you completed each act and earned at least a C rank, you'd be transported to the boss of that stage. The game was incredibly unique in that, while it used 3D polygonal graphics, it was mostly played on a 2D plane, and would constantly shift dimensions depending on the stage in question. In fact, a special 3D analog controller was created solely for the development of NiGHTS, and was nicknamed the Spielberg controller by some staff due to the famous film director testing the game out early on in development. That fact blew my mind as a kid because E.T. is my favorite movie of all time, and knowing that Spielberg was a bit of a gamer was just the coolest thing to me. But with this new control scheme in mind, this meant that NiGHTS had the freedom to be incredibly creative with its level design. The sky was the limit with what NiGHTS could do, using their shape-shifting powers to traverse through water, snow, and wind to get to the end in time. And as a teenager who loved telling stories and wanted to be a filmmaker, I thought NiGHTS was the coolest thing ever. But more so, I connected with NiGHTS more than any other game at that time. I used to have frequent nightmares about my social anxiety and the bullying I was dealing with. To me, NiGHTS was my way of coping with that. I'd often come home from school crying to my mom about how much people hated me, and I just wanted an escape from that. I don't think I ever would have been able to overcome that scary time in my life had it not been for NiGHTS. Now, I probably know what you're thinking. Corin, this is all fine and dandy, but where does your gender come into all of this? Well, I'll tell you. Because I was too young to appreciate the original game during its heyday, I wouldn't get the chance to get into the series until Christmas one year when my dad took me to GameStop to pick out a game. That's when I saw it on the shelf. A new NiGHTS game for the Wii titled NiGHTS Journey of Dreams. After we were done shopping, I hurried to put the game inside the console and was treated to what is, in my opinion, one of the best openings to a video game I've ever seen. The orchestral score, the gorgeous visuals, and the pure playfulness of NiGHTS' flight throughout the opening got me so excited, and it's here where my love for the franchise began. Journey of Dreams followed a similar structure to that of its predecessor, and introduced two new characters, a soccer player named Will, and a budding violinist named Helen. With the addition of cutscenes and full-fledged voice acting, the world of NiGHTS was expanded upon to, mixed results.
Dualize.
While many fans consider Journey of Dreams to be lesser than its predecessor, I still loved the game as a kid, and I still think it's a decent game in its own right. It expanded the story of the original game while still remaining faithful to the lore and backstory that the original presented. It may not have been the sequel that fans wanted, but at the very least, it kept NiGHTS relevant for as long as it could. But as I played through the game further, I had a strange, sudden feeling. I started to question myself. While I was born male, I definitely didn't act or feel like other boys my age. I didn't have a father figure in my life, as my parents separated when I was little, so all I had was my mom, my sister, and my grandmother to take care of me. This feeling of dysphoria kept nagging at me, until I made the discovery that NiGHTS was androgynous. Naoto Oshima explained in an interview with the official Sega Saturn magazine that NiGHTS was neither male or female, and was designed to represent whomever entered the dream realm regardless of gender. A hero for everyone. So in a way, NiGHTS was my first introduction to a non-gender conforming character in anything. And going back to the Peter Pan comparison earlier, it really makes a lot of sense because in most theatrical productions, it's tradition for Peter to be played by a woman. So while I might not have understood the feelings I had back then, little did I know, NiGHTS eventually sent me on the path to discovering that I was non-binary. Years later, as I've continued to discover myself and experiment with whatever makes me feel comfortable, I look back on the game that led me down this path with incredible fondness. I may have been too young to fully appreciate the depth of NiGHTS' gameplay, but now that I've played both games, I can understand why people love NiGHTS as much as they do. It's the quintessential definition of easy to learn, difficult to master. But I also like that inexperienced players didn't have to get the best rank in order to beat the game. Had it been the opposite, I'd be singing a completely different tune. Couple that with the creative visuals and memorable soundtrack, and you got one of those rare gems that truly sparks the imagination and innocence of youth. But more importantly, it helped me overcome a weird and difficult time in my life. It inched me closer to discovering who I truly was, and if something as simple as a game featuring a genderless, whimsical jester could do something like that for me and millions of others, then it truly deserves to be celebrated. I know that I didn't talk too much about the games in question, but trust me when I say this, you should definitely play NiGHTS at least once in your lifetime. There's so much I could go on about with the story, the characters, the visuals, but none of that would be doing NiGHTS any justice. So it's best to just go out and try the game for yourself. It's dirt cheap on Steam. I think it's only like $5? So you have no excuse not to play it at this point. Happy anniversary, NiGHTS. May the dream never die.